Hello. It's a real pleasure to be here at the 5G America's Women's ICT Leadership Virtual Summit. My name is Kim Mallalieu. I'm Senior Lecturer at the University of the West Indies and Deputy Chairman of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. And today I'm going to chat about some considerations for building safety and inclusivity into a digital public infrastructure. DPI. We're going to start with what is DPI in the first place, then why DPI, some key pillars of DPI, that is, of course, digital public infrastructure, some risks that we have observed, and we're going to wrap up with building in safety and inclusivity measures into digital public infrastructure. So what is DPI? Everyone wants to know. The thing is that there are very many definitions. There are some common factors that appear across all definitions. And in addition, there are very many use cases for DPI across multiple sectors. Here are some sample definitions. Society-wide digital capabilities essential to participation in society and markets as a citizen, entrepreneur, and consumer in a digital era. Similar to roads, a physical network essential for people to connect with each other and access a huge range of goods and services. Another definition, solutions and systems that enable the effective provision of essential society-wide functions and services in both the public and the private sectors. We are very focused on DPI in the Caribbean. We are very interested in digital public infrastructure, and sifting through the very many definitions is not an easy task, but one of the widely accepted descriptions of DPI is from the G20, and it says set of shared digital systems that should be secure and interoperable and can be built on open standards and specifications to deliver and provide equitable access to public and or private services, again, at societal scale, and are governed by applicable legal frameworks and enabling rules to drive development, inclusion, innovation, trust, and competition, and respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. The description goes on to say that DPI is an evolving concept that may not be limited to sets of digital systems with these characteristics and could in fact be tailored to specific country contexts and can be referred to with different terminologies. As mentioned, the Caribbean nations have a keen interest in DPI. And we recognize the impacts of DPI across several sectors. Here are some examples. In low and middle income countries, the GDP is set to increase by 20 to 30% by 2030 in the finance-related DPI and payments and credit systems. Low and middle income countries are also set to increase the number of persons with access to digital payments by 12 to 16% by 2030 through the use of DPI digital payments. In the legal sector, 28 to 30% more persons are set to access state-backed dispute resolution through DPI. And we expect to observe a reduction by 10 years in the time it takes for individuals to access judicial services, a drop by 19 to 31% in the time to resolution, and a drop by 12 to 19% in the cost of litigation. Also, the direct benefit to citizens of government transfers is set to increase by 17 to 21 billion US dollars by 2030. So there are compelling reasons to consider DPI. The key DPI building blocks, or some refer to them as pillars, are considered to be digital identity systems that provide verification of identity, electronic payment systems that provide secure and efficient financial transactions, and data exchange systems, which provide seamless sharing and management of data. So let's consider one case, digital identity systems case. India has been operating a number of DPIs for several years, over a decade, and its Aadhaar system, digital identity system, is the world's largest program. It was launched by the government in 2009 with several objectives, including the financial inclusion of persons and cash displacement, sovereign solution, and a multiplier of economic activity, and also for open banking to drive innovation and fintech incubation. The program has seen in excess of 1,389 million resident IDs administered, over 102 billion e-authentications have been conducted, and from less than 35% of the banked population in India to in excess of 80%. And this increase has been felt predominantly amongst women in India, in fact, closing the gender gap. The savings, the government savings, have been estimated to exceed $33 billion US. We have observed some risks, however, in digital ID systems across the world. For example, in Uganda, about 15 million persons risked exclusion from essential public services and entitlements as ID system there has been mandatory. A lawsuit has been filed. And this has occurred. Similar situations have been observed in other countries. For example, in Kenya, there have been cautions of a digital ID system exacerbating inequalities, discrimination, and exclusion of historically marginalized communities. The system has been declared illegal on account of the potential data privacy risks and inadequate mitigation strategies for sensitive data. In Mexico, the collection of biometric data has been deemed a violation of human rights and civil liberties, including the rights to privacy, access to information, freedom of expression, and more. In our own region, in Jamaica, the National Identification and Registration Act was deemed unconstitutional on the basis of the mandatory data collection, which it was deemed was a violation to the right to privacy. After revisions, the regulations were approved in May of 2024, and the rollout is expected by the end of this year, 2024. Let's look at another of the pillars or basic building blocks of DPI, and that's digital payment systems. In Brazil, the PIX system, which was introduced just a few years ago in 2020, with objectives to foster competition in national payment systems and promote financial inclusion. Currently, it exceeds 168 million users. That's 78% of the population in Brazil. And these figures are as at August of 2024, last month, a few months ago. 4.3 billion, in excess of 4.3 billion transactions were seen in April of 2024, and since then, far more. The system provides multifaceted functionalities and competitive pricing. There is a well-defined legal framework which the proponents of the system claim ensures transparency, accessibility, and certainty for all stakeholders. So this is a digital payment system, which is a very important building block or pillar of DPI. We've observed some risks in digital payment systems, and these include to privacy, extensive data collection, and even surveillance by the government. Security risks, for example, digital fraud and cyber attacks. Financial exclusion, that is to say, digital divide excludes many from digital payment benefits. So we must address this digital divide. Dependence on technology. There are risks associated with the dependence of network technology on technology, and the impact, therefore, of network outages and other technical failures. Not only that, but the concentration of market power, and we've seen this in some cases around the world, the concentration of market power can lead to limited quality and a variety and pricing benefits. And this is typical of monopoly systems. So the third pillar of DPI, data exchange case. An example is the X-Roads data exchange layer developed by Estonia's Nordic Institute for Interoperability Solutions with the governments of Finland and Iceland. This is a free and open source software and ecosystem solution. It is considered to be a digital public good, DPG. Its objectives are to streamline data exchange, sorely needed, to enhance security, and to improve the efficiency of digital services. It has been deployed by more than 20 governments and will be deployed by the Trinidad and Tobago government, my own country's government, this year. As you can imagine, some risks have also been observed with the use of digital data exchange, and these include privacy violations, security violations, and other forms of, and various forms of exclusion. For example, in Telangana, that's a state in India, there have been algorithmic errors. For example, vulnerable communities have been reported to be excluded from the local government of Telangana's food security program due to faulty algorithmic results. There have been other observations about DPI systems around the world. For example, various forms of exclusion. In India, for example, the CoWIN platform was the only means of booking COVID-19 for several months until an offline enrollment system was adopted. Predatory lending has been observed in the South African Social Security Agency system, which outsourced digital grants disbursements to a private company. It has been reported that there was lax regulatory oversight and governance, unlawful and unconsented deductions, and vulnerability of citizens' data, as well as predatory lending practices. Also, we have observed that there has been considerable sectoral variability, even in the same country. For example, in India, which has been engaged in DPI for several years, its retail payment system, UPI, enjoyed strong support, regulatory regime, and a clear regulator. Approximately 74% of all digital payments in India in the previous financial year were through this system. However, on the other hand, in the healthcare sector, this faced a number of legacy challenges, inertia, and costs to adopt digital information sharing and records maintenance. DPIs operate at society scale, and they enable us to achieve a number of significant benefits. We have observed a number of risks, and it falls to us to make observations also about strategies to mitigate these risks. When we consider the risks, we take into account a number of agreed principles and objectives. For example, we recognize the International Human Rights Framework, which articulates rights with respect to asylum, freedom of expression, nationality, participation in public affairs, free movement and residence, non-discrimination, access to education and information, other equal access to other public services, remedies for rights violations, and also privacy and security. When we look to the Sustainable Development Goals, for which DPI are considered to be important levers for many countries, there are many objectives and goals specified in the SDGs, but are relevant to the consideration of risks. For example, the SDGs highly value peace and justice, sustainable cities and communities, gender equality, reduced inequalities of other sorts, strong institutions, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Also, focusing very much now in the digital realm, we focus our attention to the digital realm, and we recognize the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation and its emphasis on human rights and human agency, digital trust, security and stability, and inclusive digital economy and society. If we observe these three, the International Human Rights Framework, the SDGs, and the roadmap, we recognize that there are very many intersections. And these are very important to us as we prioritize how we develop DPIs which operate at societal scale. So we see that we can categorize the risks to individuals in DPIs broadly in terms of risks to safety and risks to inclusion. Risks to safety include privacy vulnerability, digital insecurity, as recognized in the roadmap, physical insecurity, as recognized in the Human Rights International Framework, and the lack of recourse, which is recognized in very many. Risks to inclusion include discrimination, unequal access, other forms of exclusion, and disempowerment. Not only are there risks to individuals, but because DPIs operate at society scale and because there is considerable investment, both on the part of those who create DPI and on the part of those who rely on DPI, there are several risks that arise from structural vulnerabilities. One of these is digital distrust. A DPI cannot be sustained or bring value to individuals or society if those individuals and society have digital distrust. They have distrust in digital systems in particular, but not limited to DPIs. Safeguards are not effective even if they are put in place, if there is weak rule of law, if there are weak institutions, if there are technical shortcomings, and of course, if the DPIs themselves are unsustainable. So we can observe means by which the risks can be mitigated. And we say that a very useful way of thinking of risk mitigation is across the life cycle of DPI, from conception and scoping, strategy and design, development, deployment and transformation, and operations and maintenance. And the mitigation of risk does not fall to one actor in the DPI ecosystem. It falls to all actors in the DPI ecosystem. Decision makers, funders, advocates, governance stewards, regulators, technical builders, operators, and service delivery agents. So let's look at some of the risk mitigation strategies through the life cycle, starting at conception and scoping. It is important to clearly frame the goals and objectives, identify core problems and challenges within society, specify process for requirements engineering, assess impact potential of the DPI, analyze the enabling environment for barriers, anchor rule of law and institutional capacity for safe, inclusive DPI implementation. At the strategy and design stage, it is important to engage with stakeholders, all stakeholders, to understand both the individual and societal needs for which DPI provides relief and solutions, identify partners for collaboration, advocate for the removal of barriers in the enabling environment, establish standards, protocols, and metrics to assess societal impact, set design objectives and specifications according to best practice, employ strategies to mitigate design-related risks. You do all of this at the strategy and design stage. At the deployment stage, it's important to evaluate and select appropriate building blocks for your DPI, through which you can assure safety and inclusivity. You must code to design specifications. It is important to build open APIs and sandboxes. Extensively test across diverse use cases to ensure that no one is excluded and everyone is safe through the use of your DPI. And of course, fill gaps in institutional structures, policies, and regulations. At the deployment and transformation stage, because DPI is not a linear process from a single start point to a single endpoint. It really is an iterative process with several cycles of iteration. So there is an initial deployment, perhaps, which extends from existing digital systems in your country, and then subsequently various iterations of transformation. At this stage, you would, of course, install, configure, and activate, as well as scale hardware, software, and network components. Build capacity of responsible authorities across the ecosystem, refine the DPI on the basis of evidence, as well as relevant data and feedback. Always important to engage with stakeholders regularly and to communicate widely. Activate a robust governance framework with monitoring and redress. I've already pointed out to you some of the risks associated with weak governance frameworks. And of course, plan and onboard people to carefully manage system scaling and integrity. Finally, in the operations and maintenance stage, in a single cycle of DPI, it is important to continuously monitor, manage, maintain, and evaluate and upgrade the DPI to ensure safety and inclusivity through technical, organizational, and normative, which is to say policy, regulatory, and practice means. It is important to employ innovative methods for ongoing engagement across the ecosystem to ensure that redressal mechanisms are fit for purpose, continuously assess readiness to leverage policy window or opportunities to scale. And it is important to manage the environmental impact by the use of strategic choices for all aspects of DPI design and implementation, and of course, continuously learn and improve. So if you are interested in building safety and inclusivity into your DPI, then perhaps you can refer to the Universal Digital Public Infrastructure DPI Safeguards Framework, a guide to building safe and inclusive DPI for societies, published in September 2024, launched at the Summit of the Future on the 24th of September. It outlines risks, both foundational and operational principles to mitigate the risks. It is a living, actionable framework to embed safeguards into DPI, and it provides hundreds of specific recommendations for different actors in the DPI ecosystem at various stages in the DPI lifecycle. You can find out more and, very importantly, contribute to the living framework at www.dpi-safeguards.org, and you can contribute and ask for clarification, pose any other questions you might have at dpi-safeguards@un.org. Thank you very much. You can reach out to me at kim.mallalieu@uwi.edu.